Hello AP World History. So this video is actually just going to be introducing us to the Indus River Valley civilizations. China is a part of this PowerPoint, but I'm going to save that for a future video. And also just to let you know, as far as religion is concerned, I'm going to actually chunk the flipped classroom videos on religion in Southeast Asia together in a separate presentation. That way we can finish our test that we need to take at the end of this week, and then we'll get back to just finishing up the rest of period one very quickly after we get back from Sukkot. So with that said, let's introduce the Indus River Valley a little bit more. So we are familiar with the geography as we discussed it in class, but it's always good to have a visual. So obviously we know that the Indian subcontinent lies south of the Himalayan River, and we see that the Indus River is where these societies originated, but the Ganges River is also just south of the Himalayan mountain range here, and as you see, dumps out into the Bay of Bengal. Very, very populous region still now. And of course, here we are, the Khyber Pass, which is one of the really only ways that one can actually pass from the west, from southeastern Europe, from the Middle East. The only way that they can really do it is that way. Otherwise, it's by sea, and that is very difficult in ancient times. So the Indus River Valley civilizations, as far as time is concerned, they're essentially the third major civilization that develops in AP World History. The problem with studying the history of the Harappan or Indus River Valley civilizations, we actually tend to say Harappan civilizations when talking about both Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, just to let you know. So what's difficult about this is that the geography of present-day India is very different from the geography then. Actually, the floodplain has, I don't remember if I'm getting this right. Essentially what's happening is a lot of artifacts, a lot of human remains actually lie below the water table now, which just makes it very, very difficult, if not impossible, to excavate. So even though humans have arguably lived in this part of the world since around 6000 BCE, the first real artifacts that archaeologists are able to uncover are from more like 3000 BCE. The first human remains were dated back to 2500 BCE. So it's a little befuddling because archaeologists know that people have lived there for much longer, but really can't answer so many questions about it. Again, this is the subcontinent of Asia, right? So it is part of Asia, but since that makes sense, since it ultimately is a peninsula that juts out into the Indian Ocean, it's not seen as Asian just in the traditional sense of the word. We would say South Asian to make that distinction. So this region makes up three major countries there now. It's India, obviously, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And a couple more geographic features before we switch forward. Again, as you notice, mountains separate India from the rest of Asia. Again, the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush. And the Indus River, as we can see, also drains into the Arabian Sea. I was talking about the Ganges River. What matters about the Arabian Sea is obviously this is going to connect the Indian subcontinent to a lot of very vital trading areas and other very ancient civilizations like Mesopotamia and Egypt. Okay, so as far as the climate is concerned, you probably know that India is very mild, if not very hot. A lot of that is because all the cold winds that are coming from north of the Himalayas cannot get over the Himalayas. They just get blocked. So ultimately that kind of traps this warm air in. Now this is a very, very fertile area, but at the same time, the weather is very unpredictable. So you may also be familiar with the fact that there are monsoons in this part of the world in Southeast Asia. So monsoons are seasonal winds, and they affect the climate and the way of life. They tend to produce a lot of flooding and they're not entirely predictable. One does not know precisely when a monsoon will come and when it will end. So that means that in ancient times, before technology was able to actually help curb a very violent river, the Indus would very frequently flood, and it could, of course, cause drownings of people, animals, even whole villages could end up going underwater. Or if there was not enough rain during a monsoon season, or sometimes the monsoon seasons would come late, that could cause starvation, that could cause drought and famine. So what's interesting is that even though the monsoons could cause a lot of destruction, the people still depended on them. So part of that is because as these rivers are going essentially from very high altitudes to lower altitudes, so they're going from the mountains into the much lower valleys before they dump into the sea. They pick up a lot of sediment along the way. This is called silt. And so when this silt deposits all along the riverbanks, it creates very fertile soil. And it's, again, one of the major reasons why a major civilization cropped up here as early as it did. Okay, so let's think about the civilization a little bit. Here, again, I said earlier that we sometimes just say the Harappan civilization to characterize the very earliest peoples that settled in India and created cities. Harappan refers to all these different places. So again, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were the largest cities, the most well-known cities, the only ones that you would have to mention on the AP exam. Again, this is just a little bit of a diagram of what a planned city in either Harappa or Mohenjo-daro might look like. Some really interesting features here. One is that every city had like a really large fortress that actually was higher than the rest of the city, and so many archaeologists and historians have sort of hypothesized that this could be where the government is located. It has the ability to watch over the entire city. It would be protected in the event of a siege. And of course, there would be a major military presence there. So that's a pretty viable theory. And what else about their cities? These cities also often had granaries that were close to where, again, people thought the center of government was located. A granary is just a huge receptacle to store grain. So that, again, entails a really complex political structure, that they're actually able to amass this huge quantity of grain. Grain was a tax before there was a modern currency, so people could actually pay the government directly in grain. So having these huge storage receptacles implies power and wealth. Also, we know from looking at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa that these cities just had a really amazing labor force, very complex. They were able to just produce these awe-inspiring examples of architecture and just living. I mean, it was a very, very modern city for such an early period of time. And I thought maybe we could zoom in a little bit more closely. Sorry, this is ever so slightly blurry because I zoomed in. But houses were incredibly sophisticated in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro and the other smaller cities in Harappan society. So first off, the houses could be multiple stories high. So if you're looking and you see stairs on this floor plan, you're right, there actually were stairs. People had private bathrooms. There actually were essentially sewage systems. Clearly there was no modern plumbing, but people actually could drain their waste products away from their homes. So this was very much sort of modern apartment style living, very conducive to a large population. That anything that was needed from the countryside could be brought in very easily for trade. And with that said, the trade and the economy of Harappan society was also incredibly rich. Since this, again, is a very early society, really sprouting up as early as 6 or 5,000 BCE, the two major sources of food, not surprisingly, first, agriculture. Wheat and barley are two of the most sustainable crops that are produced in the region. But then as time went on, another very profitable, not edible, but very, very money-making crop was cotton. In fact, cotton still is one of the major sources of revenue for India. And one, actually, I take that back. Now in the informational age, that's not the case. I'm still sort of thinking in an historical lens, and I'm thinking about the age of imperialism. Unfortunately, my brain goes straight to that still because we're ingrained in that study when we come from the Western perspective. But in any case, cotton was something that was very profitable for the Indian economy, and this became even more the case, of course, when England controlled the subcontinent of India during the imperialist era. With that said, in addition to cotton, dyes. So one of the most well-known types of dye, the blue indigo, right? What one uses to make blue jeans, bronze clay, a whole lot of things that are traded very regularly in these urban centers. What else? Okay, as far as writing is concerned, oh, actually, just a few more things about trade, my apologies. Even things like shells, woven cloth, silver, gold as well, jewelry. Essentially, these cities were definite signs of serious wealth. As far as writing is concerned, this is one of the biggest mysteries, just in terms of trying to uncover what these places were like. You see here, this is an artifact that shows Harappan script that came from approximately 3300 BCE, and it's not at all transcribable. So essentially, scholars are completely baffled at where this comes from. Some hypothesize that it comes from Dravidian, which is a group of people that descended from the Harappan society, but they're not quite sure. As far as religion is concerned, again, just like the Mesopotamians, the earliest Indus River Valley civilizations had a very significant interest in fertility, and that manifested itself in their art and in their religion. There were fertility gods and goddesses, and oftentimes in art, just like the Venus sculptures from Sumeria, you actually see images of art that sort of exaggerate the sexual characteristics of women. Since there isn't much of a written record, the political structure of Harappan society is actually pretty unknown, which is, again, something that makes it a continuing mystery for scholars and also for students in history. We do know, though, that their economy was sophisticated enough, and also they were educated enough or aware enough that they had a standard weight and measure system throughout all of Harappan society, and that also shows us that they traded a whole lot. The population of this area actually got, my apologies, I'm not there yet. The population of this area actually reached approximately 40,000 at its height, so that's really significant. But then around 1500 BCE, the society collapses. Now, this decline actually started as early as 1900 BCE, and there's no real one root cause for the decline of Harappan civilization. At least scholars have not come to a definite conclusion. The two theories are, well, the two major things that probably contributed to the decline of Harappan society are both environmental in nature. One of them is that over time, as the population increased so rapidly, and technology evolved as well, essentially the land started to dry out. So over irrigation, deforestation, these things kind of made the Indus River Valley more and more of the desert-like climate that it currently is. Then also, because of the monsoons, there could have been a series of floods that gradually destroyed cities. Archaeologists have discovered massive amounts of dead of human remains in certain places. So they theorize that something really catastrophic could have happened. So other people say it could have been something like an earthquake, maybe a tsunami in coastal areas. So we don't quite know for sure. And this one won't take as long. It's probably just one slide. But we're at 1430, so I'm going to stop this video here, and then we're going to pick up with the culture of the Aryan civilization that migrates into the Indus River Valley, and that will be it for India, so stay tuned.